In the vast geographical tapestry of the United States, there exist innumerable communities, each one with its own history, its own vital pulse. Today, our gaze rests upon a specific corner, nestled in the heart of Ohio. For those not familiarized with the minutiae of life in the American Midwest, the name of Hamilton might not evoke an instant image, but its existence is as tangible as that of any bustling metropolis, although its scale is markedly different. Hamilton, Ohio, presents itself before the observer as a community of modest proportions. It is not one of those cities where skyscrapers pierce the clouds and the incessant clamor of traffic defines the rhythm of life. With a population that, in current times, barely touches 70,000 inhabitants, Hamilton is a testament to the quieter life, more rooted to the land, that still endures in the vast continent. Its urban structure is a reflection of its character, an industrial zone where steel and manufacturing have forged its sustenance, a vibrant commercial heart that attends to the daily needs of its citizens, and, finally, an extensive residential area. It is this last one that summons us, an amalgam of serene streets, where the aspiration of the American middle class found its materialization. This is the epicenter of our narrative. Imagine for a moment that we embark on a leisurely walk through these streets. The afternoon sun, perhaps, casts long shadows, and the air carries the faint aroma of freshly cut grass, mixed with the memory of recent rain. The sounds are soft. The distant hum of a lawnmower, the intermittent song of a bird, the almost inaudible murmur of domestic life that transpires behind the windows. Suddenly, before us, a scene unfolds that seems extracted from a postcard of yesteryear. A street of impeccable straightness, flanked by immaculately maintained sidewalks. Along these sidewalks, in a display of order and harmony, majestic trees rise, their branches extending like protective arms, offering a welcome shade and a natural refuge against the sun. These trees, silent witnesses of decades of stories, confer upon the street an atmosphere of venerable antiquity and serene beauty. Beyond the tree line, perfectly manicured lawns extend, an exuberant greenery that precedes the structures that rise in the distance. It is a deeply rooted custom in these latitudes that dwellings do not settle directly at the edge of the street. Instead, a strip of immaculate lawn acts as a prelude, a transitional space that culminates in the garage, the facade of the house, or any other edifice that conforms the landscape. This disposition, conceived for aesthetics and intimacy, adds a particular charm to the surroundings. We find ourselves on streets that have resisted the test of time. Their cobblestones or their asphalt have felt the passage of innumerable generations. The houses that populate them, many of them, trace their origins to the second decade of the 20th century, some even dating from 1910. However, their antiquity does not translate into deterioration. On the contrary, these edifices are a testament to the care and pride of their owners. They are the archetypal American houses, with their cozy porches, their sash windows, and their facades that evoke an era of simplicity and solidity. Allow me now to invite you to visualize one of these dwellings. Its appearance is comforting, evoking a sense of home and stability. It is a structure that, in the year 2022, was transacted for an approximate sum of $140,000. It is important to maintain perspective. This is not a sumptuous mansion nor an expansive estate. The house we present to you possesses, on its upper floor, barely 2 bedrooms, complemented by a small attic that hides under the sloping roof. On the ground floor, a functional kitchen and a compact bathroom share space, with a living dining room that, frankly, is a relatively contained area. It is, in essence, a narrow house, designed for efficiency and intimacy. Underground, a basement, far from being a vast extension, is also of modest dimensions. A practical addition without pretensions of grandiosity. It is a house built predominantly of wood, a material that confers warmth and character upon it, and that has stoically withstood the passage of the seasons. Its year of construction, 1919, places it at the dawn of a new era, and its location, on Minor Avenue in Hamilton, Ohio, firmly anchors it in the geography of this community. Curiously, and this is the turning point of our story, the occupants of this particular dwelling, throughout the years, have shared a peculiarity, a persistent and, often, annoying interaction with unwanted visitors. And we do not refer here to entities from other existential planes or to intergalactic travelers, although the suggestion of the paranormal could, on occasion, have grazed the truth. We refer, rather, to the curious, to the gawkers, to those attracted by an invisible magnet. It is true that the house, in its design and execution, does not boast the magnificence of a palace, nor the audacity of an architectural masterpiece. It is, as we have said, a simple abode of an almost palpable humility. However, and despite its apparent modesty, not a single day passes without a car slowing down as it passes in front of it, so that its occupants can point at it with their finger, whispering and observing with unusual intensity. This phenomenon persists, despite the time elapsed since the house was the scene of the events that catapulted it to infamy. There was a time, not so many years ago, when this constant observation was a true nightmare for its inhabitants. One of the owners who inhabited the property in the early 1992s found himself in the imperative need to place multiple signs with the warning, "Do not disturb." The situation escalated to such a point that, on more than one occasion, he had to resort to local authorities to disperse the crowd of curious onlookers that gathered. We insist, the house does not possess a visually impressive aura. However, people's obsession reached the extreme of knocking on its door for the most unusual reasons. From Girl Scouts, who, with the innocence of their age, wished to take a peek inside, to mystical figures, mediums, paranormal investigators, nosy neighbors, and, of course, journalists eager for a photograph that could capture the essence of its dark history. It is precisely out of respect for the privacy of its current occupants that we avoid providing the exact address. Rekindling the influx of curious onlookers would be an irresponsibility. But the question floats in the air, an interrogation that does not cease to wander in the listener's mind. What extraordinary event, what situation so mysterious and profound, transformed this modest abode into an object of such persistent curiosity? Perhaps the name we will now reveal to you will begin to unveil the enigma, a key piece in the puzzle of its legacy, James Urban Rupert. If this name does not resonate with familiarity in your memory, allow us to present his image. His countenance, like that of the house, does not seem especially prone to attracting the attention of gawkers or curious onlookers. James inhabited that house, the same one we have described, until the year 1975. His appearance, far from being eccentric or striking, was that of a common man. Therefore, the mystery persists. Why so many annoyances? So many people knocking on the door, mediums imploring to enter to perceive invisible energies and other similar phenomena. The answer, as often happens, hides in the intricate labyrinths of a life. Allow us to delve into James's biography to understand the origin of this persistent shadow. James was born on March 29, 1934, in the same community of Hamilton, Ohio. However, the world into which he saw the light was a very different place from today's. His arrival into the world was received with a question that, for the infant, would be the prelude to an existence marked by a lack of affection. What was it? Boy or girl? The birth assistant's answer, boy, provoked a grimace of disappointment on his mother's face. She harbored the deep hope of having a daughter, as she already had a male child, Leonard, his older brother, and a girl. Leonard had been born barely 2 years earlier, and the mother longed with all her being that this time fortune would smile upon her with a little girl. But it was not so. Destiny delivered her one more bundle, and with it, an emotional burden that would manifest in insidious ways. To top off misfortunes, the existence of this family was far from joyful. They subsisted in what, without euphemisms, could be described as a hovel or an adapted barn. Imagine the rigorous climatic conditions of Ohio, where winter can be relentless, and visualize a family inhabiting a precarious space, designed for animals more than for humans. The father, a man dedicated to raising and selling chickens and pigs, was also known for his violent and irascible temperament. Thus, James, this tiny being, arrived at a home where affection was a scarce commodity. A mother who had received him with disappointment, and a father who could not tolerate even his shadow. They shared their living space with the animals, in a shed where the barriers between human and animal were, at most, symbolic. This brutally austere living condition soon manifested itself in the child's fragile health. From an early age, James suffered from chronic respiratory problems. His stature was tiny, his growth deficient, and a generalized weakness made him vulnerable to all kinds of illnesses. In stark contrast, his brother, Leonard, flourished. He was alert, agile, strong, a child who developed with enviable vitality. James, on the other hand, struggled against coughing fits that prevented him from breathing normally, episodes that often sowed panic in his parents and forced them to take him to the doctor. The medical diagnosis was categorical. Little James suffered from severe asthma and, crucially, should not be in contact with feathered animals. He was allergic to feathers, to the dust they shed, and to the pungent ammonia smell characteristic of chicken coops. The fluff that chickens and hens shed, invisible and ethereal, was a poison for James. The irony was cruel. James Urban Rupert, allergic to feathers, lived in a place where the only separation between his living space and that of the chickens was a rudimentary mesh, placed there so that the birds, not the children, would stay warm. The father, immersed in his own obstinacy and lacking the resources or the will to seek a more suitable environment for his son, kept the family in that misery. Thus, James found himself condemned to an atrocious childhood in every sense. Upon starting school, his physical fragility and constant, sickly state translated into deficient academic performance. Leonard, the older brother, excelled in sports, was more corpulent, and his academic abilities were superior. However, at home, the father made no distinctions. His violence preyed equally on everyone, including the mother. He was an implacable, cruel man, and felt not the slightest affection for this small and sickly son, whom he perceived as a burden. The permanence in that home was a reflection of that indifference. The little one's suffering intensified at school. Physical activities, so common in American education, became a torture, suffocating him and leaving him breathless. Soon, the teachers, out of caution, opted to segregate him, seating him in a corner to prevent him from suffering an asphyxiation attack. His fragility, combined with the lack of outdoor activities, made him notably pale, and to top it off, at the age of 9 or 10, he began to wear thick-lensed glasses that accentuated his image of weakness. While his classmates devoted themselves with fervor to baseball, football, to athletic competitions in the vast sports fields that usually accompany schools in the United States, James limited himself to observing, a perpetual spectator of life. It was at this time that they began to call him Sissy, a pejorative nickname, a cruel euphemism, to denigrate his lack of manliness and his fragility. And it is that, being so vulnerable, he became a target of abuse, even from his own brother. Leonard, far from being a protector, often joined in the torments. He took his belongings, locked him up, played heavy pranks on him, and mocked him. Each humiliation, each act of cruelty, embedded itself deeply in the child's psyche. James became a solitary, withdrawn being, immersed in his own inner world. His only consolation was reading. Despite his enormous glasses, he devoured any book that fell into his hands. However, this intellectual refuge did not translate into academic success. his performance remained mediocre. When James was approximately 12 years old, tragedy struck again. His father passed away. He suffered from tuberculosis, a disease he had kept hidden, and which, ironically, was exacerbated by the chicken dust in the barn. The father's foolishness and cruelty had led him to his grave at the early age of 37. Death left the widow and her two sons, Leonard and James, in the most absolute economic precariousness, as the deceased completely lacked prosperity. The family, now reduced to three, began a pilgrimage from one room to another, a constant search for a roof under which to shelter. Leonard, the older brother, assumed the role of man of the house with admirable determination. He abandoned day school to work and, simultaneously, continued his studies at night school. He was an example of resilience and brilliance, an intelligent man, although his harshness often manifested itself, especially with James. How to forget that time he locked him in the closet, locking it and leaving with his mother, who didn't even ask about the whereabouts of her younger son. James was trapped in darkness and confinement, a traumatic experience. Or that other occasion, when Leonard, without prior notice, sat on the head of a prostrate James on the floor, resting. These acts of cruelty deeply marked James, transforming him into a withdrawn, silent, and deeply complexed individual. It was not an isolated event. The humiliations were recurrent. If we observe a photograph of James in his youth, one sees a man of modest stature, perhaps no more than 1.60 meters, with a weight that hovered around 50-something kilograms. He was not particularly handsome, but neither did he exhibit strange features. He was, in appearance, a common man. However, his exterior concealed an interior lacerated by the complexes he dragged from school. So many painful experiences, so many rejections, that upon reaching the age of seeking female companionship, the results were disastrous. The economic precariousness at home did not help. Inviting a girl to a graduation dance or a party required, at least, a few dollars in one's pocket. While his friends enjoyed social life, James remained on the sidelines. And the day he finally dared to invite a young woman, the result was an authentic fiasco, a humiliating disaster. The girl, of a more impetuous character than James could handle, did not find in him the answer to her impulses. At the culminating moment, when finally a woman had agreed to go out with him, James was unable to meet the expectations of a gentleman, finding himself forced to flee the scene, desperate and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The girl, of course, took it upon herself to spread the incident everywhere, which only served to deepen James's spiral of problems and complexes. While James sank inexorably, Leonard, his brother, ascended. Studying at night and working by day, he forged a promising future. The mother, too, toiled, doing occasional jobs and selling small objects to keep the home afloat. Finally, they managed to acquire a house, a place to settle down, but James's situation did not improve there. At meal times, Leonard usually received the most substantial and adequate portion. James, for his part, abhorred pre-cooked meals, so common at the time. Boxes of already seasoned spaghetti, pasta, soups, all of that produced a deep aversion in him. He longed for a good steak, something substantial, but his inaction and lack of initiative prevented him from getting it. His academic performance continued to decline. Eventually, he met another girl, a young woman who seemed decent, who perhaps could come to love him. We do not possess an image of her, nor should James have kept one. When he finally proposed to her to be his girlfriend, the relationship lasted barely 8 days. She abandoned him for another man, a milkman or a truck driver, leaving him once again to his fate. Life seemed to take it out on him. James, disillusioned, left university after only 2 years. His brother, on the other hand, graduated in electronic engineering, a prestigious career, and quickly got a position at General Electric, ascending in the hierarchy with surprising celerity. While Leonard prospered, James wandered from one job to another, a store, a gas station, precarious jobs that barely allowed him to scrape together a few dollars. With this scarce capital, James found an ephemeral happiness in bars. where he could drink a glass and, perhaps, feel for a moment that elusive masculinity, that strength that life and others had denied him. Accustomed to feeling diminutive next to men of great stature and weight, James discovered an unusual talent. He began to practice shooting with weapons, pistols, and rifles, and, to his astonishment, he was exceptionally good. He possessed acute aim and innate dexterity with weapons that allowed him to learn quickly. Thus, he began to acquire weapons, to exchange them, to buy ammunition. His favorite pastime was to get away from home, walk to the solitary riverbank, place an endless number of empty cans, and shoot. It was not a great diversion in itself, but it was an activity that provided him with a respite, an ephemeral sensation of power and manliness that the outside world denied him. Back home, the contrast was brutal. His mother, Charity, invariably praised Leonard's virtues, completely ignoring his own. And, to tell the truth, James's virtues were scarce and difficult to find. However, the straw that broke the camel's back, the definitive blow that broke his spirit, was the moment he met Alma, a woman of dazzling beauty. James was smitten with her, despite the fact that he himself dealt with a physical problem, erectile dysfunction, possibly of psychological origin. He liked Alma with an unusual intensity, but destiny, cruelly, intervened. James discovered, with horror, that Leonard, his own brother, had snatched her away from him. Alma, the woman James longed for, had opted for his brother. That was the last straw. That betrayal pushed him directly into the abyss of alcoholism. James plunged into drinking, while Leonard and Alma's life flourished. They married and, as if they were rabbits, began to have children, one after another, throughout the years. A numerous progeny, of all ages and appearances, from blonde children to brown-haired girls, some beautiful, others paler. Meanwhile, James continued living with his mother in that two-bedroom house, one for her and one for him. It was not unusual for his mother's shouts to be heard in the mornings. "James, get up and find a job. James, stop doing that thing you're doing." The mother seemed obsessed with the idea that James, not having a wife, had become a sinner, or perhaps harbored other beliefs. The truth is that James did not find a corner of peace in his own home, always under the yoke of reproaches and recriminations. The situation deteriorated even further. At 38 years old, he was still single, without a partner, with temporary and poorly paid jobs, and living under his mother's roof. One good day, an idea occurred to him that he thought brilliant: to invest in the stock market. James was an avid newspaper reader and had devoured articles about stocks and financial markets. He managed to gather a few dollars, all he could save, and also borrowed money from his brother Leonard, who by then already had 8 children and a financially comfortable life. His mother also lent him a sum. Even Alma, who had been his girlfriend and was now his brother's happy wife and mother of his 8 children, entrusted him with some money. With all these funds, James invested in stocks, and at first, fortune seemed to smile upon him. However, destiny played another trick on him. A severe economic crisis hit the stock market, and his investment completely vanished. James found himself without money, without a job, indebted to his brother, his mother, and his sister-in-law, his ex-girlfriend, and driving an old Volkswagen sedan, a Beetle, that constantly failed. This man, on the verge of despair, began to experience increasingly strange mental processes. He developed the conviction that his brother was responsible for his car's breakdowns. In his mind, Leonard had always been the cause of his misfortunes. Why wouldn't he also be the cause of his vehicle's mechanical problems? But where does this intricate story lead us? Why does the life of this man, apparently so insignificant, deserve our attention? We are in 1975. James, born in 1934, was then 40 years old, about to turn 41, and his life was a shipwreck. He went in and out of bars daily. Sometimes he got some temporary work in a store or some business, But his constant smell of alcohol and his bad temper condemned him to one dismissal after another. His mother had given him an ultimatum. Either he got a job or he left the house. Yes, his own mother was kicking him out of the home. From that same house we showed you at the beginning, that little wooden house. Apparently so pretty. James did not pay rent, and his mother demanded a contribution or his departure. The question remains in the air. What does this man have to do with the house and the Gawkers? Allow us to delve a little deeper into the last chapters of his life. Over 40 years old, unemployed, with an old car that broke down at every moment. And to top it all off, James had a nefarious idea. He decided to call the library by phone. He was a frequent visitor, and had observed one of the attendants, a kind girl, with a sweet smile and clear eyes that blinked with joy. She, however, did not pay him the slightest attention, so James decided to call her and utter a series of obscenities to her. A terrible decision. The young woman contacted the police, and as she had recognized James's voice, a frequent visitor to the library, the authorities appeared to give him a reprimand. James ended up admitting his action. The young woman did not press charges, but the incident had a devastating impact on James. He, in his delirium, believed that the girl had not recognized him, but that his brother and mother had heard him while he was making the call and had reported him. It is improbable that this was true, since his brother did not live in the same house, but in his own home, with his 8 children, his wife, and an enormous truck that housed them all. Leonard had an apparently perfect life, but in James's distorted mind, his brother continued to ruin his existence, just as he had done since childhood. It was then that James began to notice strange phenomena. Upon picking up the phone, almost immediately, he heard an unmistakable click. He had read it. They were spying on him. He didn't know if it was the FBI or his brother and mother, but the certainty of surveillance invaded him. When he drove, that patrol car that passed on the road, according to him, followed him, without stopping him, just observing him. In a store, the woman behind the counter kept looking at him with a suspicion that James interpreted as espionage. Walking down the street, 2 people on the other side of the sidewalk, murmuring, stared at him. A paranoid terror seized him. They were spying on him. Something in him, something mysterious, interested all these people. But James was convinced that everything was a plan orchestrated by his mother, his brother, and, why not, also by Alma, the woman who, in his mind, had betrayed him. Submerged in these fears and paranoias, the only refuge James believed safe was the bar, Hole 19, a name that referred to golf. There, in the gloom of the place, he used to sit and enjoy several drinks, sometimes until well into the early morning. In this place, he felt he could speak without fear, until one day, 2 individuals sitting behind him seemed extremely suspicious to him. A wave of nervousness invaded him. They were spying on him, even in the bar itself. This was unbearable. Days passed, and James's fear grew, confining him more and more at home. This reclusion, of course, rekindled his mother's reproaches. Either you pay or you leave. Without a job, without prospects, James found himself at a crossroads. At the same time, in his mind, the idea that his brother had ruined him, that his father had ruined him, that women did not want him, kept circling. Everything accumulated. James Urban Rupert was about to turn 41 years old on the 29th of March, 1975. And that day, in the morning, he celebrated his 41st birthday in the only way that provided him a minimum of relief, by going to the riverbank to shoot. He placed a pile of cans and discharged his fury into them. In the afternoon, he returned home and slept. At night, he went to the bar, to Hole 19, where he struck up a conversation with the bartender. He confided to her, until well into the night, his sorrows about his mother, his brother, and all the bitterness that consumed him. The bartender, accustomed to listening without judging, listened to him attentively while attending to other customers. James left, returned, and continued drinking until the bar doors closed in the early morning. He returned home. The 29th of March 1975 was a Saturday, Holy Saturday. The next day, it would be Easter Sunday, a festivity that in the United States is celebrated with particular joy and traditions. That Sunday, his brother Leonard's 8 children would go to their grandmother's house for the traditional Easter egg hunt. The activity is simple. Someone hides numerous sweet eggs, decorated with colors and details, among the vegetation of the front garden, and the children search for them with enthusiasm. Leonard's children varied in age, from the youngest of 4 years to the oldest of 17, with intermediate ages of 16, 11, 8, and 7. It was a hubbub of children, a bustling crowd, which is why Leonard possessed a spacious truck. They went, then, to the house. But if you have paid attention to what we have narrated, James had just turned 41 the day before. And do you know something? No one had organized a birthday party for him. Not a small treat, not a little cake, not a happy birthday. Nothing. His only way to celebrate was to drown his sorrows in alcohol. And when he returned home in the early morning, from the adjoining room, his mother shouted at him, "If you worked as much as you drink, we would be millionaires." The next day, the house was preparing for a big celebration. The hubbub of the children, the presence of his brother Leonard and his sister-in-law Alma, the promise of a family dinner. Around noon, the family arrived. James, who was in his upstairs room, heard the commotion, came down and watched the children arrive. They devoted themselves with fervor to searching for the Easter eggs hidden among the garden plants. James observed for a moment. The scene provoked an ephemeral smile in him, a flash of distraction. Then, everyone entered the house. The mother set about preparing something. Leonard sat around, waiting for sandwiches and refreshments for the kids before dinner. Until that moment, everything seemed to proceed normally. Everyone was happy. Laughter filled the air. Conversations flowed, but not with James. Alma and Leonard conversed with Charity, James and Leonard's mother. The children came and went up, came down, shouted, argued over the bathroom, as on the ground floor there was only one, and the other was upstairs. At one point, James felt tired. A persistent headache plagued him. He apologized and went up to his room to lie down. He had been drinking, and now, the worst was yet to come. It would be around 4 in the afternoon. James woke up, dazed, sleepy. He had slept a couple of hours, perhaps 3. From downstairs, the hum of children playing and running reached his room. He went down the stairs and, in the kitchen, on the table, there were several things. There were Alma and Leonard. The mother was cooking something. A couple of children were standing at the bathroom door, talking about something. James asked about the food, as he had just seen something he didn't like, a package of fast food. His mother replied that she would prepare that for the children. James felt uncomfortable. Boxed prepared food for Easter dinner? That drove him crazy. He apologized, saying he would go out for a moment, that he would go to the riverbank to practice target shooting to distract himself. He didn't want to express what he felt at that instant. He went up to his room, sat on the bed, opened a drawer, and took out a .357 Magnum revolver. It was a cannon, not a simple pistol. He put the bullets in it and left it aside. From the same drawer, he extracted a .22 caliber pistol. He also prepared it, loaded it. He took out another .22 caliber pistol, refilled it, and placed it nearby. Then, from another place, he took out a rifle, put the bullets in it, and hung it on his shoulder. One pistol here, another there, and one more. He put some small boxes of bullets in his pockets and went down the stairs with the intention of going out to the field. When he arrived at the kitchen, already uncomfortable with the detail of the boxed prepared food, just as he was about to say goodbye, his brother Leonard turned around and asked him, "Hey, how's it going? How's the Volkswagen? Is it still sick?" That completely unhinged him. It couldn't be. For James, if Leonard asked him that, it was because he was the culprit. In James's mind, his brother had always done something to harm him. And suddenly, that question, which perhaps Leonard formulated with the intention of offering help or fixing the car, completely unhinged him. It made him believe that his brother, on purpose, had been breaking down his car, and that now he was asking about it to mock him, to offend him, to humiliate him. James took out a revolver and shot Leonard once in the head. Immediately after, he turned and put another bullet into his sister-in-law, Alma, who was sitting next to him. The mother, Charity, standing next to the stove, tried to lunge at him to stop him, but did not manage to do so. James shot her 2 more times. Immediately after, the children who were there, one in the bathroom and another outside, without a word, received a burst of gunfire. He turned around and began to walk towards the living dining room, where the other children were. There, in the living dining room, the rest of the little ones. Bang, 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 bang. The bullets ran out. He took out another revolver, then the rifle, and finally reloaded and finished off his victims. In barely 5 minutes, James Urban Rupert had murdered 11 people. He fired a total of 31 times. The youngest victim was barely 4 years old. The oldest, 65. All were members of his own family, and all were dead. He had shot each of them multiple times. Of the 11 victims, 10 received direct shots to the head at close range, which means they were instantly struck down inside that beautiful wooden house on the tree-lined and picturesque street. This man, in a span of 5 minutes, ended the lives of his entire family. After the massacre, he sat down. He looked for his coffee cup, took a sip, and waited. It was 4 in the afternoon. He watched as, slowly, the bodies whose lives he had just taken bled profusely. Then, he got up and went to the bathroom. He checked what his mother had left in the kitchen, ate something, and sat down again. Everything was in perfect order. The only thing that was overturned was a trash can, which one of the children had knocked over when falling, after receiving a bullet impact to the chest. Everything else remained in its place. Even the bed was made. Around 9 at night, although some reports suggest it was 3 hours later, according to police records, authorities received a call. A telephone call from that house, that pretty little house on the pretty street, in a small town. The man on the other end of the line, when the 911 operator answered, asked, "What is your emergency?" He said, "There has been a shooting." "Are you injured?" inquired the operator. "No, not me. There are several people hurt." And he provided the address. After that, he hung up. The man who had called was James, the same one who had just killed 11 members of his family in cold blood, the same one who sat down, ate a bite, drank coffee, and then called the police to await their arrival. When the agents arrived, James was standing at the door. From the inside, as the officers approached and asked, "What's happening, did you call?" One of them could not avoid the automatic reflex of drawing his revolver and aiming, because from where he was, with the lights on inside the house, he could see a couple of bodies in a pool of blood. Immediately after, they opened the door, took him out, knocked him down, and entered, finding 11 bodies, 5 of them in one area of the house. Charity, the mother; Alma, the sister-in-law; Leonard, the brother; 2 little ones who were there, also dead. And in the living room, another 6. The authorities could not believe what they were seeing. That was a horrifying scene. The people in the surroundings had heard nothing. Everything had been so fast that no one realized what was happening. Of course, James was arrested. 31 bullets had been fired at 11 people. It was extremely fast. And the most terrifying thing is that none of the victims tried to flee, which suggests that they didn't even become aware of the horror unfolding. Everything happened so quickly that they couldn't process what was happening, that Uncle Jimmy was shooting them all to death. One of the children, 11 years old, was only 30 centimeters from the exit door, which was open because they had been playing. He could have run out screaming, but the human mind has its limits. There are things it cannot process, situations too incredible to be assimilated. At that moment, it is probable that that boy, upon seeing how Uncle Jimmy came down and killed his father, his mother, and his grandmother, remained paralyzed, unable to move, and immediately after, received a shot to the chest and another to the head. More police arrived. James did not try to escape. They arrested him, took him to the police station, and the subject did not answer any questions. They thought he was in shock, but no, he was not in shock. He remained impassive. The authorities recovered the weapons, which were not even hidden. They were on the table and on an armchair. The fingerprint identification work was carried out that same night, and all the pistols revealed James's fingerprints. There was no other evidence. He had committed the crimes and was splattered with the victim's blood. It was undeniable evidence. Not much investigation was needed. Even so, the investigation continued. During the interrogation, when asked if he pleaded guilty, James replied that no, he was innocent, and that it had been an insane crime. In legal jargon, innocent by reason of insanity, or not imputable, meaning he could not be judged. The authorities were surprised by the coldness of his few words. Inside the house, the violence of the attack, the cruelty, were astonishing. Children playing in the living room were mercilessly murdered. Now, this man had to be brought to trial. A public defender was assigned to him, as James lacked resources. The lawyer, in his first statement, argued, "This man is not prosecutable. This man is crazy. Who kills 11 people in that way and is not crazy?" It sounded logical. However, the authorities were not so convinced. The first diagnosis by a mental health expert considered him a paranoid schizophrenic, but that idea was soon dismissed, arguing that it had been a psychotic episode. Others opined that it was a phenomenon related to his troubled past. The point is that finally, the trial proceeded. The prosecution refused to accept the insanity, defense, or mental problems. In fact, they didn't want to go to trial. They believed this man should be confined in an institution for dangerous mentally ill people, and that's what they aimed for. But the prosecution suspected something more. Every day there are people who suffer, people with personal problems, but not every day someone kills 11 members of their family in 5 minutes. Here was something strange. It was then that the detectives, with their peculiar nose for the unusual, began to inquire a little more. Not like in movies, but with the persistence and intuition of real life. One of the detectives who was at the crime scene and who felt truly disturbed by the brutality could not understand. Psychotic, revenge against his family? What was the motive? What had detonated such a massacre? You and I know that James was hallucinating, that he believed his brother had broken down his car. Revenge against his brother, against his mother, against Alma, who had cheated on him. But the 8 children? Why them? They had been playing with him a while before. Something didn't fit. The authorities dedicated themselves to investigating a little more, and during the trial, they began to ask key questions. One of them was the testimony of his brother's question about the car, which the defense used as the trigger for a psychiatric condition, a psychotic outburst that led a sick person to end everyone. Until, suddenly, the prosecutor stood up and said, "And the $300,000? A dense silence that could be cut with a knife seized the room. The courtroom, right there in Hamilton, had been packed with people. It was madness. People with children peering through the windows, those who could not enter the courtroom area, observing through any crack, standing on the edges. Everyone opined, everyone murmured, and suddenly, the prosecutor stood up and uttered that phrase, "And the $300,000? And the silence was absolute. It turns out that the prosecutors had worked hard, and the 7 detectives had discovered something crucial. James was his mother's sole beneficiary, since upon his brother's death, he would be the only direct heir. But the brother, Leonard, had a considerable life insurance, significant investments, and a personal insurance. In addition to one from the company, his sister-in-law, Alma, possessed savings and the family home, as well as other investments. All of this, together, amounted to a figure exceeding $300,000. But the revelation did not end there. The detectives discovered that if the mother, brother, and sister-in-law died, all those assets would automatically pass to the children. If you see the direction of this story, if James killed the mother, the brother, and the sister-in-law, everything the three had passed to the children. But if all the children died, to whom would it pass? To the only direct relative remaining. Yes, a part would go to Alma's relatives, but everything else, which amounted to more than $300,000, would be for him. There was the answer. Why kill the brother? For revenge? Hatred? Resentment? For all the terrible experiences. The mother? For revenge? For the badly cooked spaghetti? For whatever. The sister-in-law? For having cheated on him with his own brother. All those motivations were understandable for the three adults. But the children? The children were murdered because, if he didn't do it, the money would go to them. If he managed to convince everyone that he was mentally ill, he would be interned in a special prison for the mentally ill, where, after some time, he could pass the tests, prove his recovery, and, therefore, receive the money and resume his life. Because there is a regulation in Ohio. A convicted murderer cannot inherit from the person he murdered. If James killed his brother, he could not receive his brother's inheritance. But if, being in a psychotic episode, completely out of his mind, in a state in which he was not prosecutable due to his own mental health, because he was not capable of recognizing good and evil, then, when he recovered from the psychiatric hospital, he could indeed receive the inheritance. Everything seemed coldly planned. And not only that, the detectives, in their usual back and forth of questions and investigations, had inquired at the gun store, where they discovered that 2 months earlier, James had asked about the cost and how to get silencers for weapons. That is, he was looking for a way not to be immediately discovered, to have enough time for his purposes. This man was planning the attack 2 months before. Even the night before the massacre, at the bar, he had talked with the bartender about a problem he wanted to solve and had not yet managed to solve. Now we know what the problem was and how he solved it. But the story does not end there. With all this evidence presented, James Urban Rupert was found guilty of 11 counts of first-degree murder. The death penalty corresponded to him, but at that moment, the Supreme Court of the United States had suspended capital punishment sentences, so he was sentenced to 11 life sentences, without possibility of bail. The detail is that he requested a new trial, and yes, it was authorized. This time, the process was carried out in a location 150 kilometers from Hamilton. The defense arguing that local jurors would be influenced by the notoriety of the case. In this second trial, held in 1982, new testimonies yielded different evidence. But even so, the same conclusion was reached. A crime with monetary and revenge purposes. On this second occasion, he was only sentenced to 2 life sentences. It was considered that the deaths of the child victims and the sister-in-law had occurred in a state of psychosis, and therefore he was not punishable for it. It was explained that, probably, at the moment of the attack against his brother, in that uncontrollable fit of rage, upon realizing what he had done, he had opted to end the entire family almost automatically, as if he were not conscious of his actions. Well, those were the explanations. This man had ended the lives of those people, and in theory, he could have expected to be released on bail in 1995. However, when he requested parole in 1995, the bureau in charge of it flatly denied it. The next opportunity to request it would be in 2015, already being a very old person. The photo of the old man we showed you at the beginning is from that era. This man, who now looked like a respectable old man, was actually the executioner of his entire family. He would not have another opportunity to request parole until 2025, but he could not. He passed away in 2022 due to natural causes in the prison hospital. Now, the house. The pretty little house on that tree-lined street, with all those nice things, would not remain silent. A year after the massacre, authorities decided to auction it and auction all the goods inside. And do you know what? In a single day, more than 500 people attended. Women with children, with strollers, entered the house looking for where the bloodstains were. The house had been cleaned, obviously, but people went for the morbid curiosity, for the terrible, to see if there were bullet holes. And yes, 357 against a 6-year-old child. Of course, it left a bullet hole in the floor or on the wall. The fact is that they went there to rummage, to see, and to buy trinkets, the armchair from the house of the Easter killer, and the house was emptied. Then, it was put up for sale. Thus, in 1976, the new history of this house began. And it's not just a rumor or gossip, but a documented fact. The people who bought the house could not occupy it. They rented it, and the tenants also could not inhabit it, and so on. That was madness, a parade of tenants. One after another, people who arrived, stayed a week, and left, disappearing never to return. And then, someone who lived there temporarily ran out and told horrible things. Because at nightfall, in the house, footsteps, little noises, little voices, giggles began to be heard. There were even those who claimed to have heard screams from throats that no longer existed, from people who were not there, and they ran out, terrified. But, do you know something curious? In 1989, the house was bought again, this time by an individual of a somewhat surly character, a subject who, on all occasions, assured that he never saw anything, that nothing happened in that house, that all that was stupidity, that ghosts do not exist, that he never felt anything while he was there, and that, please, they should stop bothering him. When a journalist knocked on his door, he earnestly asked him to write in his press note that they should leave him alone. Do you know what? That same individual put the house up for sale shortly after, in the year 2008. Yes, 19 years may not seem like little time for a property. But in reality, he did not occupy the house. The house was rented, and stopped being rented. It was put up for sale, but of course, when people found out that this place had been the scene of 11 homicides, no one bought it. And this man began to declare that the house had nothing to do with it, that it was stupidity, hoping to be able to sell it, and he finally succeeded. In 2008, and for $10,000 less than he had asked, he managed to place it. The next family remained in the house until 2014. 6 years. This new family probably did not feel anything out of the ordinary, but they sold the house in 2014, and so on. The house has had 30 owners, 12 of them between 1919, its year of construction, and the year 1975. The remaining 18 between 1975 and the current date. That is, this house has never remained in the hands of its owners, on average, beyond about 6 years. Does that seem like a coincidence to you? This house had a problem of origin. Not only because of the homicides, but probably from before. Something murky happened there, in the state of Ohio, in the United States. The current law does not oblige a seller to previously inform their client if something occurred in that house. The person who bought it in 2008 declared that no one informed her that there had been 11 homicides there, because the law does not establish it as mandatory unless the client asks. If the client asks, the seller is obliged to inform what occurred. And of course, when they found out, they felt a chill. The house, however, was already cold by that moment. So many years had apparently served for the house to be quiet. Or, who knows if, in the same way, the interviewed person refused to say what they had lived inside there so that the house would not lose all its value. It is a supposition, we insist, and only that. But the house has had many stories, many owners, and the most terrible thing happened that Easter Sunday. But we want to tell you something more. The story does not end there, because in 1996, another bloody event would occur across the street, in the house opposite, right opposite. A young man, Timothy Bradford, practitioner of Satanism, and many other things, murdered his 19-year-old girlfriend. Yes, his 19-year-old girlfriend, mother of a beautiful baby girl, was brutally murdered by this guy across the street. But that is another story, which we will tell you another time.